Hi, Minister. Good to see you and pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to start off and just ask you if you could, for our audience, to quantify really the problem that this legislation aims to address. Are there a large amount of businesses, for example, that were using scabs? Is this a problem that needed fixing?
Yeah, it's a problem, and in fact, it's a problem that can carry on for sometimes generations in a workplace. So it makes bargaining a heck of a lot more difficult if you've got a poison workplace. That happens when you bring in replacement workers. This brings balance to a table. Look, we've got a pretty good track record overall. The Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, 96% of cases usually get solved, and for those other 4%, I'm usually here on your show. We'd rather, get rid of all of them if we could. This is something that unions have been asking for well over 100 years, and we think the time has come. So this is something that we had in page 22 of our platform. It's something that we've worked on with the NDP, and we're following through with it now.
And I'll ask a little bit about the semantics of that in a second, but I just want to make sure I understand it, because I get that unions have been asking for it, but lots of stakeholders ask for different things. I'm just curious if the evidence exists, like in those 4%, for example, of cases that you mentioned, have the use of scabs impeded reaching an agreement?
Well, for instance, even on the St. Lawrence Seaway, which we just rectified, you had a workplace there that was poisoned by the fact that repeatedly the employer was using outside contractors for work that was clearly for the union, and when it was repeatedly brought to adjudication, they repeatedly lost. I frankly don't think, given what I know of that bargaining table and the time that I spent at it, that they would have reached the point that it would have required a work stoppage in the St. Lawrence Seaway costing us hundreds of millions of dollars if, in fact, the threat of replacement workers or the use of replacement workers hadn't been there. I want to eradicate the 4%. I really do believe that by bringing this in, you are adding more certainty and stability. And I'll give you an example. What's very core to this is what we call maintenance of activities. So maintenance of activities is something that once they begin bargaining, the two parties have to come to an agreement on it in 2 weeks. It's basically what's essential. What can we make sure, what are we going to continue to do to look after the health and safety of our workers? What are we going to continue to do to look after the workplace itself, to make sure that they have a place to go back to work when the work disruption is over? Or if there's any, damage to the environment, how do we mitigate that? They have to do that within 2 weeks. If they don't, the Canada Industrial Relations Board is going to do it for them within 90 days. So again, we're dealing with more definitive timelines, and I think more definitive timelines just lends itself to more certainty and more stability, not only for unions here, but for business.
Just to be clear, in the case of the Seaway, for example, when you talked about using outside contractors, isn't that different than scabs? And does this legislation in any way prevent a company from, having its own employees, but also having contract workers?
They are allowed to have contractors. Yes, they are.
So then how would this legislation prevent what happened from happening?
What I think it would have done is it would have made it, you had a certain amount of clarity that the idea of replacement workers is not to be used. And that what it will do is it will cause everybody to concentrate on the table, which is something that whenever I do appear on your show or others, I keep repeating over and over. The deals are made at the table. When you have things like replacement workers out there, or lots of talk, frankly, about back-to-work legislation, which I am not keen on doing ever, when you have that talk going on, it distracts from what I need people to be doing, which is focus on the table. That's where the deals are done. That's where both parties should focus all their energy, time, and effort.
Let me ask you about the politics, Minister, because you mentioned this was in your platform. Today, we also heard the leader of the NDP say, essentially, that they push you to do it. Would you not have done this if not for the NDP?
No, page 22 of the platform, we would have done it. My relationships with unions and some of the other things that we have done based on their advice and with their good guidance, for instance, on paid sick leave. This is part of an overall program for us. But I will say, look, this is a far richer and better piece of legislation for having worked with the NDP. Alexandre Boulerice in the NDP, who I negotiated with at the table now for many months, has been not only constructive but wise. And look, they bring a depth to this that I don't have. They bring a depth to this after years of labor organizing with roots in the labor movement. Both himself, Daniel Blakey, Matthew Green. I benefited greatly from having worked with them, and I think we have a richer piece of legislation as a result. I think, I would do this more often, and Alexandra and I have, actually committed to that. We're going to look at what other problems we can solve together. This is what people pay us to do, to work, and to work together. And I try and do that wherever I can when I can find a willing partner. Monsieur Boulerice was exactly that. And I'm very proud, I think, of the effort that we put in this together.
But
would we have done it on our own? We would have. I don't know if it would have been as good, but we would have.
Just a quick point of clarification then, because Mr. Singh seemed to indicate that the party would bring forward some amendments. Did the NDP sign off on basically what you announced today in the legislation as it's tabled, to your mind?
Mr. Singh was never at the table with me. I don't know what he's referring to. There may be things that come up in committee, but I don't know what he's talking about.
Okay, I just want to ask you a couple questions before I let you go, Minister, about another file I know that you've been talking about. Today actually marks 2 weeks since the announcement was made that there would be a carbon tax carve-out for home heating fuel. It actually becomes implemented today. When I was asking one of your colleagues from Newfoundland and Labrador, Minister Goody Hutchings, about the announcement and why other sources were exempt from it, that would impact perhaps Canadians outside of primarily Atlantic Canada, she told me, in part, perhaps they need to elect more Liberals on the prairie so that we can have that conversation as well. Your government later closed the door completely on further carve-outs. Was that also a political decision?
No, look, I can't speak for Minister Hutchings. What I will say, is that I was in the caucus room with her in Newfoundland and Labrador caucus at the end of the summer. I was in Atlantic caucus when we realized that this was a big problem that our constituents were telling us about, as I told you, a little over 2 weeks ago. And it was something that we dealt with at National Caucus. We worked on a solution with the government, and I think we landed up in a very good place in the sense that this is something that will affect anybody who's on home heating oil, no matter where they are in the country. This is by far the most polluting and most expensive form of energy to heat your home. Just like we did with coal, we got rid of it, and this will allow people the time to do it, and allow us the time to make sure that we have the people in place to help them do that.
So I just want to be clear, though, because I know that you're saying everyone in Canada is entitled to that carve-out, and that's very true. But the percentage of Canadians, for example, in the Atlantic provinces who rely on heating oil to heat their homes is far greater than anywhere else in Canada. That's why other premiers, in fact, unanimously on Monday, are calling on your government to consider exempting other sources as the rest of the country faces an affordability crisis. Why will your government not entertain that proposal? Is it political?
Because home heating oil is 4 to 5 times more expensive than natural gas. 4 to 5 times more expensive than natural gas. And in order to get a heat pump or to convert to electricity, the capital cost in the beginning can be somewhere around 20 grand. Not many people have that. So apples, oranges, home heating oil, natural gas. I mean, to sit there in the House and to hear Conservatives get up and talk about the winners, the ones who are on home heating oil. I can tell you, as somebody who was on home heating oil and switched to electric, the difference is unbelievable. But we needed some help, which we received from the provincial government, in order to take over some of that capital cost. It is very, very expensive for most people in this country. We are giving people both the resources and the time to get this done. Home heating oil is atrociously expensive. To compare it to natural gas is not even the same planet.
But actually, when you're talking about the issue of affordability, it's not just Conservatives who are making those calls. I interviewed the NDP Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew. I spoke with the NDP Premier of BC. They're saying the same thing. The rate of inflation, for example, in Nova Scotia is 7.7%. In Manitoba, it's 8.4%. There is an affordability crisis right across this country, but your government, your Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, chose to make this announcement surrounded by Atlantic MPs. Your colleague said if they elected Liberals in other parts of the country, they could have that conversation. How is anyone in this country supposed to not infer from that this was political?
4 to 5 times more expensive, a $20,000 capital cost in order to get off it. People are trapped by home heating oil in this country, wherever they are in this country. They are trapped by high prices, but way higher prices, in order to find an affordable alternative. That's the case. We make these cases all across the country all the time. It's what we do in this place, are find compromises to make sure that when we achieve a national objective, it is done in keeping with the way different communities and different provinces in this country are, the facts on the ground. It's one of the reasons I'm in politics, is to make sure that what we do in this place reflects the problems that are taking place out there in this country. Very different problems, very different numbers, very different circumstances in different parts of the country. I grew up in Labrador. We used to think St. John's was the long arm of the law, let alone Ottawa. I used to criticize our premier at the time because what they were doing in St. John's in no way reflected how people felt things were in Labrador. And the same is here, 4 to 5 times the price. And I'm told that people who are on home heating oil are the winners here. I don't think so. It's a problem. We'll solve it.
Why then were there only, if other people in the country are going to benefit from this so greatly, why were their members of parliament not surrounding the Prime Minister 2 weeks ago to the day when he made this announcement?
I don't know. I am quite happy with this announcement, both in its national scope and making sure that we are looking after those who most deserve it. Those people who are in home heating oil are paying 4 to 5 times the amount of people who are on natural gas in this country.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it there. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Vassy.